Hello, and welcome to the Heathen's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Siri Vincent Plough, and I'm so glad you're here. This is the show where I explore heathenry through a queer lens. We will be talking about traditional witchcraft, runes, folklore, and so much more. Join us, won't you, as we journey to the ends of the 9 realms and back. Hello. It has been a while. I am coming out of hibernation with news and a very exciting bonus episode. I'm so thrilled to be sharing this conversation with Aidan Wachter, with you about one of my favorite subjects, Black books and personal grimoiring. But first, I want to share some things with you about what I've been up to in the podcast hiatus. So I took a hiatus from my Patreon and from creating this podcast to refocus my own creative flow, and I'm really excited with the direction I'm moving in. First things first, this podcast isn't going anywhere. In fact, I think it's going to get a lot better. I'm just retooling what I focus on in this podcast. So to that end, I'm actually conducting my first ever listener survey. This will help me figure out what kind of content you all are most interested in and help me focus more deeply on the podcast. I have so many good ideas, and you all are also already giving me so many good ideas. So I've included a link to the survey in the show notes. There are several changes I've already decided on. I know from here on out I will be operating on a seasonal basis. Each season I will dive deep into a different aspect of heathenry and magical practice. This fall season is centered around the second 8 of the Elder Futhark through the lens of an underworld journey. I'll be talking about the runes and storytelling, and I'll even dive deep into some deities or other spirits that are related to whatever rune or natural force I'm talking about. I also plan on having guests on the podcast who specialize in underworld workings and working with underworld deities and spirits. Or, they might also work on other themes that are drawn from this second 8 of runes. So this second season of the Heathen's Journey podcast will start up in just a few weeks and will run through the fall. Then I'll take a couple of months to write the next season and we'll be off and running again. But now let's focus on today's episode. In this conversation, Aidan and I talk about personal grimoiring, his black book method from weaving fate, and building your magical practice. Aidan Wachter has been actively involved in magical practice since the 1980s. His work reflects a wide-ranging, eclectic, and non-dogmatic approach with influences from many paths, including witchcraft, folk magic, and chaos magic. His books focus on the practice of the craft as a learnable set of skills that can be developed rather than the innate talents that might be inherited or granted to the seeker. They are field guides rather than a philosophy. If you do not know Aidan's work already, I encourage you to check it out. His most recent book is Changeling, a Book of Qualities, and you can purchase it and his other works on his author page at Amazon. I've included a link to do that in the show notes. If you have not read his books, I encourage you to just go ahead, do that right now. If you find this conversation interesting, I encourage you to join me for my talk at the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival. Of course, this kind of depends on whether you're listening to this podcast as it's coming out or later, but if you do happen to hear this podcast before August 6th, then you will still have time to sign up. I will be presenting personal grimoiring and the Swedish Black Books tradition. Through making art, we create the sacred, and through recording our magic, we tell true lies. There are many rich traditions of grimoiring and keeping magical records, and for good reason. Your magical record is one of the most vital aspects of magical learning. Through keeping a magical record, you're able to see what worked, track your progress, and learn how to live in the rhythm with the world around you. In this workshop, I talk about the magical record keeping within the Swedish Black Books, or Svartkonstböcker tradition. And I will also share techniques to awaken your own black book and make it a true conspirator in your magical practice. If you do decide to come, please bring your own grimoire for a guided consecration ritual. I encourage you to register not just for my class, but for the full weekend because there are some really amazing courses being offered. It is truly an honor to be among these incredible teachers. And honestly, it's such an honor to have even been able to speak with Aidan. I think that you'll find this conversation to be very juicy and helpful as you are establishing your own magical practice. And now, let's get to that conversation. Hello, Aidan. Welcome to the Heathen's Journey podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Siri. I'm really excited to get to chat with you.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get really into the deep stuff, I have a question to ask you.
Sure.
And that is because I've taken so many years of German and Germanic languages that whenever I see your name, I think you're supposed to pronounce it Wachter.
Right. I pronounce it Wachter. That's the...
Okay. Okay. I was in I think my Patreon, we were doing a book club of either Six Ways or Weaving Fate. And I said, oh yes. And I love when Wachter.
It's been many things throughout time, I'm sure. So I take whatever gets used.
So I've given listeners a brief kind of introduction to you before the episode started officially, but in your own words, who are you? What do you do?
I am a magical practitioner who's been at it for a long time, since the 80s. I used to be a talismanic jeweler. And I would say that I'm kind of I think of myself as being very much a student of whatever it is that I do. I'm not sure what I really call it. As you know, I kind of make up names periodically. But yeah, to me, I'm just someone that has found some things that were really useful to me that I try to share in the hope that they might be useful to other people who are interested in this magic thing.
Yeah. I actually really adore your approach to sharing about magical techniques. It feels very down to earth. And at the same time, I like how much kind of the theory of what you're doing you get into. And it's less a recipe for taking an action and more like, hey, this is what I'm doing when I do this.
Right. That was the thing. That was the thing that I always found missing when I started, is I found a lot of, you should see this. This is what this does. Kind of instructions, or visualize this just like this. And you should think about this way. And I couldn't really find anybody, most of the time I didn't find people that were talking about, this is kind of the practice, and this is what I think maybe it does, and this is maybe why I think it works. Which to me is a much more open approach, because I'm interested in, I guess I just have that base level belief that everything is going to be context driven. And so if I can share the why behind what I do something, even if that's not the same thing that you end up wanting to do or that you find most effective, it kind of, the goal was to kind of get people into my head and then maybe start sharing their heads a little bit about what they saw, rather than trying to fit it into the mold of this is what you're supposed to see, or this is how it's supposed to work. And so most of everything that I have kind of worked out has been based on that. It's like a lot of the early work that I did was really just, okay, this is supposed to do this thing. That's not what I find. And so what does it do, and why does it do that?
Yeah, I personally have a really hard time with absolutes in magic. I feel like we're doing this beautiful, liminal, weird, sometimes very subtle thing. And, when, this thing always means this. If I see that in a book, I'm like, does it though? I don't think that anything always means one thing or another. And I also think that you have to um, you have to think about these things on this level in order to be a really effective practitioner, right? You know, like
Right.
it's going to work better for you if you have set it up in a way in an internal system that makes sense for you.
Right. And I think that it's also, I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is I think magic is really a revelatory about us and about the world and all that stuff. And that can only really happen if you're really open to whatever comes through and go, oh, okay, I didn't like that. I'm supposed to like this thing according to this ritual. This was supposed to be a good experience. And it wasn't. And is that something that I did wrong? Or is it just that maybe that's not a good mesh? Is it this is not the right time? Which is kind of an interesting thing to kind of with what we're thinking about today, because that's kind of as I was thinking about it, that's where my head went, was a lot of that stuff of like, okay, there's a lot of ways we think things are going to be, and they don't necessarily go that way, and that's true in everything. So why wouldn't it be true in magic?
Totally, totally. So today we're actually going to be just really focusing down on a specific technique, or a series of specific techniques that, you know, you can kind of adapt to your own making. And that is working with a personal grimoire or a magical book.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was recently reading Weaving Fate,
Mm-hmm.
I read it for the first time over the winter. And I loved how you structured the black book aspects of the section. So, can you give us a brief summary, as brief as possible, of
Mm-hmm.
the black book in the way that you work with it, and then we can kind of continue the conversation from there.
Sure. So the black book is a form of what gets called a hypersigil, which is a term that comes from Grant Morrison. He coined it, I believe, in reference to his comic, The Invisibles. Um, and the idea is that a hypersigil is a long form narrative piece of magic. So some form of narrative that can be novel, it can be comic books, it can be music, it could be song, it could be dance, it could be paintings. Um, and for me, the thing that I found worked the best for me, because it was something that I already did, I think, was journaling. And so I eventually came to this thing where I began using a diary format uh, of hypersigil, which is what I call the black book. Um, and yes, so it's on the top, it's a really simple, straightforward thing, and then it gets really fun, I think. So
Yeah. So if you're creating a black book, the idea is that you basically set aside and consecrate a specific notebook that you're going to use for this working, and you're going to write journal entries as if things that you want to happen have already come to pass.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's like a sort of uh, it's bringing that future closer to your present is kind of how I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a super interesting thing. And so I would kind of, if we kind of think about magical books in general, right? So if we, all the magical books that we have now, if we're thinking historical, not so much in the modern age where we've really had a lot of access to them and great volume that we do, at least in the West here with the internet and all that stuff, and Llewellyn and Weiser and all that stuff, big publishers that put out lots of stuff. Um, Magical books were really notebooks that were created by magical people, right? So that they would remember the things that worked or the things that they learned or came across and didn't want to forget. Um, and I know that you have an interest in the northern stuff. Have you looked at the Scandinavian Black Book tradition at all?
Yes, a little
Right.
bit.
So it's a guy that I knew well up until his death, and not closely. Tom Johnson has a really cool book that was his doctoral dissertation on the Swedish Black Books, and I can never Revelor Press has put it out as, I don't know how you pronounce it. You can pronounce it because I can't.
Yes, I actually have the book in my hand right now
Yeah.
because as I'm recording this, I have my stack of research books, and this is at the top of the pile. It is Svartkonstböcker.
Right. So what Tom did was he was looking at a bunch of these, what they were called the Swedish black books. And these were really little, for the most part, very little journals that people had kind of jotted down formulas or spells in. And I think it's a really good view, kind of that along with something like the Galdra book, that these were usually pretty small things. These were not monstrous, 400-page books. Nobody had that kind of money to buy that kind of blank book in general. And they were really just ways of remembering what you did that worked. That book I love because it shows you how common day a lot of the work is. So it's like, how do you make your shotgun shoot straighter? You put a skate's heart in the barrel, and then you shoot it. It's supposed to be great after that. The liver, I can't remember, and so I think that there's this long history that once we were able to kind of record what we did, or even if it was images, I think that magical folks began realizing that there was this connection between the process of recording a piece of magic and that piece of magic itself. And a lot of when I started, I'm going to play with my cat just a little bit and give her something to go chase. Go play with that. I tried to do the whole magical journal thing, and I didn't find that it worked very well for me because I tore everything apart. And I mostly used it to kind of convince myself that I wasn't doing effective magic. So that's kind of an interesting little side thing. So I didn't come into this as like a heavy magical journaler. I really kind of decided early on that was not my thing, and I was not going to do it. But what I think is kind of cool about these black books and about kind of what we would call grimoires, which is really just kind of books of magic, said fancy, is that a lot of them were considered to themselves to be power objects. Like if you had a copy of one of these black books, or if you had a copy of The Long Lost Friend for an American version, the thing itself was a power object and gave you powers, which is a really cool idea, I think.
I remember when I've been doing my research into the Svartkonstböcker, a huge part of it is also there's this, I haven't fully gone down this rabbit hole yet, but it is one that I plan on going down. But there is kind of like a Catholic folk magic sort of aspect to it where all of these Swedish priests would be getting their training specifically at Wittenberg, which was kind of this school where more magic was either taught or accepted. So they would come back from from Wittenberg with these black books, and the black book itself would be their talisman, right? They would have, it would maybe contain spirits that they worked with, or, the sigils and the keys to communicating with those spirits. And there's all of this incredible folklore around people attempting to use someone else's black book and accidentally unleashing a devil on the town.
And go ahead.
No, it's okay. I always find that so interesting as we have these priests who are coming back with this book of spirits who often are devilish or demonic or whatever, but the priest is clearly, able to work with them because they're in the black book. Yeah.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think that kind of opens up all those when I was kind of some of the earliest stuff that I found that was really just kind of cool because it was not. I mean, the early grimoires that I saw that I can remember were, the Greater and Lesser Keys of Solomon and the Grimoire of Armadale. And And then I knew some Enochian magicians pretty early on, so they had all their D-related stuff. But I really liked these little things. I know that I found the long lost friend in a little hoodoo shop, and then discovered that there were all of these weird little books that were like, they were really not written like a book that I would write or you would get published by a big publisher. They were these little weird little compendiums. Maybe it's got a couple of spells or a couple of seals from Solomon, or it may have a couple of things from the Golden Dawn, and then it may have, how to make, a floor wash with particular kind of much more hoodoo kind of based stuff. And I loved that, thinking about the fact that like I was hanging around with these kind of, though I didn't really fit in, these kind of very academically minded, very hardcore scholarly ceremonial magicians, but there were all these other people with these kind of like, I don't know how old you are, so I don't know if you remember the old stapled TV guides, but
Yes,
were essentially the quality of TV Guide or a Reader's Digest book. These were their books, and I was like, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Because it kind of showed that like there's this sense of power to these things, and I think that it's a really cool kind of route to the whole kind of world of books. And I think it's something that could be potentially kind of a little bit, I think that's probably faded a lot since there's so much more in print now than there was. And then if we go back to like what's in Tom's book, there was not much at all in print that any of those people would have seen that wasn't the Bible or a book of Psalms or something akin to that.
Yeah. And then through that, if the Bible is the only book that you have, then that it becomes doubly sacred. And, maybe you're using that as a spell book in some way, the book of Psalms, like, working magic in that way. I know I haven't done this level of research with primary documents yet, but I do know that there are a lot of just like family Bibles that have, little notes written next to the Psalms of what people were using and why, or, just like a grandma's note to self, plant garlic and this Psalm,
Totally.
Yeah. It's interesting too, being located here in Minnesota. We have way more Scandinavians than other parts of the country. And there's a university, St. Olaf in Northfield, which is about a 40-minute drive from where I live, 45. And they have one of the largest, if not the largest, collection of Black books, like in one room in the world. And it's because they would get handed down. So,
right.
This is that precious book that, people have all of this awe over, and it has to be handled carefully. And, maybe they get handed through the family until finally, you're cleaning up after grandma has passed away, and you're in the attic and you find this crazy book of spells and sigils and stuff that is very old. And so a lot of people ended up donating them to this college for research purposes. It's really interesting. It's really cool. Being in a room with that kind of history is really fascinating to me. There's a not insignificant part of myself that is definitely a folklorist and academic at heart that just wants to, accept donations of your like great grandparents' weird diary.
Weird stuff. Totally.
Please, listeners, send me your weird almanacs.
It is really funny. I mean, it's, I was thinking about in relationship to talking was this thing. So we've got like this kind of world of that stuff. We've got the Black books. We've got these folk kind of compendiums, these personal compendiums. And then we switched to this thing where we started mass producing them, right? So that's where you can go and get the Goetia or something like that online. And something switches I don't think of myself as being old, but compared to some people, I'm older. Um, in the 80s, where I was, there was not a lot out there on magic. Um, but there were a few books you could get at kind of the mall where I was, like Starhawk's book when it came out was big enough that you could get that in my town. Um, and I got interested in Northern stuff because Ralph Bloom's Book of Runes came out, I think, in '82. And that was in the mall because it wasn't really taken seriously. And in some senses, probably shouldn't be. Um, so it was really good for me to find that book. It opened my eyes to a lot of different things. I just don't think it's a great book on runes. So at that point, you kind of had to really be willing to play unless you were like somewhere around a really good bookstore or around somebody else who practiced. Um, and so I would look at something like I remember I found Armadale somewhere in a used bookstore. And there was some part of me that couldn't connect, like, these instructions are really instructions. Because I was really young, right? Like, seems crazy to say, but there was stuff like, and I remember this when I read book 4 by Crowley, because I was also really young. It was like, it didn't connect for a while, that he's like really suggesting that I do all these things in the order that he's like, even though it's clearly a recipe book, right? He's telling me this. There was a part of me that didn't initially get that. Like, I was reading it to understand it, right?
Right.
And why I think this is really interesting is this is a phase that I think a ton of people do, regardless of how much information is there. And this is one of the things that's really different about going and buying a dozen books on magic and learning a spell either from your teacher or because you worked it up and writing it down in a book. Because that thing, on some level, or you were able to ask somebody about it and they said, yeah, this one. If you're having trouble with that, this one is the thing. That might be the only thing that person or you ever uses for that thing, right?
Right.
This is what you do when the cow is having a troubled pregnancy, right? And you've read this. If you look at the folk magic stuff, people may be like, yeah. What? This is a lot of what is in these books, really. It's like, What do you do when the cow is having a troubled pregnancy, or the crops are going to fail, or you've got fungus, and you've got fungus in the wheat. This is really a big deal in a lot of these older books. And so it's really interesting because then again, you look at that and you go, if you have one ritual or spell or seal that is the key to that thing, you have imbued this thing with an incredible amount of power because it's the only way, right? This is the way you help that cow out, or this is the way you lock down your property. We see this in some hoodoo stuff too, that there's stuff that is pretty universal all over the country. There's particular things you do. And one could say that this is because it's the best way, but it may just simply be that it's a good enough way and enough people were taught it as the way. So same difference, right? And so I think it's really interesting when we go to these mass-produced grimoires and things that now you've got people going like, okay, so do I use this spirit to help me get money, or do I use this spirit from this other grimoire? And this grimoire is apparently really sketchy and hairy and dangerous. So that means it's more powerful, right? There's this whole chain, or I should never touch it because it's scary and powerful. And these are bad spirits, right? There's all of this conversation that occurs in a way that probably, I'm sure some of it did in the past, but I think happens really interestingly now if you look at online discussions about this stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's really fascinating because it's some of the stuff too, like I did, so we'll just go back. So one of the books that I did have and that I really liked was, I think it was a Dover Books edition of The Magus. And I can't remember whose book that was. Francis Barrett, I think.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I didn't practice that way already. I'd already gotten to the place where I was like, I'm not a ceremonial magician. But due to still using things like the LBRP, I kind of had a sense that I liked the archangels, that they liked me. And so I ended up doing talismanic work out of that book. not at all how it's put in that book, but using the seals, and had really huge success, and used those seals for, exorcism work and different things very successfully. Um, and it was super interesting, because then we had some interesting hybrid stuff that I had people that I knew, that I lived with, that saw this. So they kind of did the same thing, and they created these things. And for some people they worked, and for some people they didn't. And the people that they worked for had been doing the LBRP. So they already had relationships with these energies. And at least when they created the talismans, were able to imbue the talisman perhaps with that. Maybe it's not really, Raphael's phone number that you got. It's that you actually know Raphael well enough that he's willing to answer that phone anyway, right? Which then comes into that whole aspect, which I think is really where my thinking began changing about all this stuff. Is like, okay, maybe it's more relationship driven between the person and the material, because I knew ceremonial magicians who were very deeply steeped in that, where they were very efficient and very effective. I knew Wiccans who were very efficient and very effective. I knew hoodoo folks that were, and then I knew all these people who were really not, in all of those different places. And so I began thinking that it was more relational, right? And it was a combination of relation to, do you have connections to the material, or do you have connections to the spirits? What I would now say, do you have connections to your allies? If you're working with them, they're your allies. As far as in my thinking, I'm not saying that's anything anybody should adopt. Which kind of then began to me to, again, as I looked more into the folk magic stuff and seeing things like the black books, I go, okay, so these were like allies to these people. When they saw that this basically, blank book of 30 pages or whatever was itself powerful, this thing itself it has become like an allied spirit. It was more than just the spells in it. Which is, I think, something that you see a lot of folks who've been practicing for a good chunk of time trying to explain to people who are pretty new at magic, because it's like that it is really relationship driven. Even if it's just relationship to the style of working you're doing, even if you're a hardcore, there's no spirits, there's no gods, there's none of that. If you have a relationship to a way of working that has worked for you, it develops more and more power. So you could even say that that way of working has become an ally to you, right?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. So, for example, I do not consider myself a Wiccan. Nothing wrong with being a Wiccan. It's just not what I do. However, I was initiated into a Wiccan coven. And so way back in ye olde times when I was 15 or so. So I picked up a lot of habits, and got really efficient with them. Like, I can throw up a Wiccan circle in very little time. And I've definitely known students who feel very intimidated by that practice, or by the amount of steps that are involved in it. But once you explain to students, okay, well, what you're doing in these 2 steps is you're preparing the ground for the working, and you are beginning to align your energy, you are balancing yourself. And then, when you're doing these aspects, you're, calling in specific spirits or guides that you work with into a consecrated space, and you're calling forth elements within yourself. And it's like, oh, okay, if I understand the why, the what becomes a lot simpler.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
absolutely.
That's definitely something that when I'm reading, more contemporary books on witchcraft, I feel as though, when I started, there were all of these like grimoires or spell books that just had, this is a spell for this thing. And I feel like now authors are getting a little bit more, not even a little bit more, I would say that authors are getting much more nuanced in terms of why they're doing this particular kind of working, or
right.
if you need to substitute things. Like, unless I'm studying a published book as like a source work.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm looking at a black book, or a transcription of a black book from the Svartkonstbøker, I don't I don't take it at, that level. There are steps that I know that I'm missing. There's context that I know that I'm
Mm-hmm.
missing because this was never intended to be seen by anyone else.
Right. And that's, I think, a really big thing there is realizing that it's kind of like, I was looking at the Yoga Sutras the other day, and one of the things that's interesting there is it's like what they talk about the sutras being like a suture, that it's like the smallest thread that would give somebody a mnemonic that knew how to teach that stuff. And so the sutra itself doesn't really contain much. It contains a little bit of the process, and that's a big part of what Six Ways was for me, was like, what the allies were really clear on is like, show people things that are useful, but show them why you use them, and show them how you think about them when you use them. Because that's actually more important than the specific thing that you're doing. At least as I view it, because I think that there's like a lot of, universal is maybe the wrong word, but there's a lot of, there's way more to any practice that is learned from doing the practice rather than what you read on paper. It's like, it would be somebody like trying to play, like, that had never heard it, really trying to play Jimi Hendrix, even if they could play the music, if they hadn't really had all the instruction. Like, okay, this is a really weird way to use a guitar if you've never heard that kind of thing before, but once you've kind of heard it, and you kind of go, oh, that's what it sounds like. Or, in the case of magic, and the way that I talk about it a lot is like, if this is where my head is and this is what it feels like, maybe that'll make it easier for someone to step into the work and not be too worried about, oh, I missaid 2 words. Because I've never really found, unless they're really the wrong words, that would be an issue. It's like, what's the conversation about? And what are you bringing to that conversation? What's your attitude to the conversation? It was interesting. And so I was thinking about, when we were talking or thinking about the books, and so we've ended up, and we went through this world that you and I both talked about, which is like spell books that are like, gather these 3 things, put them in a bag, tie it up, say these words, light this candle, and that thing happens. And for most people, it won't, because it's missing all of the rest of the context, right?
Right.
You go, oh, and this is why I'm like so hardcore about the consecration thing, because to me, that's the thing that is the missing piece in a lot of people's stuff. Is like, no, put all your energy into that. Put all your energy into how you're handling the materia. Not that there's a right way, just that it's in what you're doing is really at the forefront of what you're doing, not this precision steps.
Yes. However you are consecrating whatever you are using for magical working is just as important as the actual magical working. And it is so easy. I'm guilty of this. It's so easy to just skip the consecration step.
Yep. And for me, I think that I got that from sigil magic, which was the idea of, okay, you create this thing, and coming from like chaos magic days, the idea was you would create this image from this statement of intent, and then you would charge it. And at some point, I just got really much more involved in the process of creating the sigils, and I realized I didn't have to charge them because the process of creating them charged them. Like, okay, what would I do that is more than what I just did for the last hour with this thing?
Right.
I can formalize it in some way, but didn't I just do that? Didn't I just go through this whole process of having this idea in my head and doing this ritual process to turn it into this other shape? What else would need to happen? And so I began not doing much else. And it's very much the case for me now that the way that I create sigils is the charging. And I still have people write like, okay, I'm still not sure about the charging piece. And it's like, don't worry about it if it's working. If it's not working, then maybe add something. But if it's working, it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually wanted to talk to you about that because I feel like there's this really beautiful harmony between, consecrating the Black Book. And when I say Black Book, I mean very specifically the style of magical journaling that you outline in Weaving
Mm-hmm.
Fate,
Mm-hmm.
where you're basically bringing the future that you desire into the current present and
Mm-hmm.
writing journal entries.
Mm-hmm.
You outline an entire, road opening and uh, basically kind of like a spirit creation almost
Mm-hmm.
ritual for those Black books. And I find that to be really interesting because it's almost as if, you keep the charm bag, which
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, um, kind of how you're structuring that like spirit element.
Mm-hmm.
And then that spirit ultimately kind of gains life as you work with the Black Book.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say more about that?
So I don't remember. I have no guess when I really kind of began thinking about. It was after I began making jewelry the first time because I stopped for a long time after this. But it was somewhere in that process that I kind of went, okay, when I'm making talismanic things, there's a moment where I begin interacting with them as if they're creatures. Not as if it's an object that has power, but as if it is a person that I know that has power and that I have a relationship with. And so that's what informs that whole process. Um, and so the thing that to me is so, yeah, it's funny. I went and looked at it again because I haven't really dove into Weaving Fate since I wrote it. So I kind of went and dug in because it's been a while since I've talked to anybody about it, and was like, oh yeah, this is like I see. It's funny because it's like you kind of know what's in there, but you don't really see the language there. And I liked the language that I'm going to throw in the allies there that we used there, because I thought it did a good job of actually kind of getting that across. And you never really know, you do your best. But I thought in retrospect, like, yeah, that worked pretty well. To me, kind of this whole thing hinges on this idea of animism, which is the idea that we are not only not alone as kind of sentient beings in the universe, but that we are surrounded in a universe that is essentially a sentient being, that is filled with sentient beings. And that, in my perspective, magic works best if it's viewed from that lens, that we're working with everything that's around us. And so this process of kind of consecrating the road opening charm and consecrating the pen is both a way of telling yourself, your kind of deep mind, that this is an important thing that you're doing and that it should pay attention and that this is a powerful thing that you're doing. And that it's an involved kind of piece of concentration. So it does that, but it also kind of tells, in my term, the field, everything that is around you, like, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to engage with all of this through this medium. And so there's a way that it's a reminder to yourself, like, we're dealing with other things. We're dealing with the world as it is. We're dealing with the fact that there are powers other than us within that world. We're dealing with the idea that world is friendly, that it would be interested in what we are interested in potentially. Yeah, and so that there's all of those layers to that process, and that's really why it's set up that way. So that when you actually go to pick the thing up and actually start writing these journal entries, the process is already kind of laden with meaning to you. We've kind of done that process, that copying out those spells and from your teacher back in Sweden in 1830 or whatever would have done. We've recreated a version of that experience, where this thing has way more meaning than the fact that we ordered, a $10 journal off Amazon.
Yeah, I think that that's actually something you kind of hit on the head, this idea that you are signaling to the world around you, and all of the anything that may be listening in, that these are your intentions. And that is something that I always really struggled with, if I'm being frank, with more ceremonial magic. I find that a lot of perhaps it just happens to be bad luck in who I have met, who is a ceremonial practitioner, but they are often less on the like animist side of things, or at least less openly on the more animist belief. And so spirit summonings or trapping or something like that can feel very transactional in a way. Whereas I feel like with other practices, certainly with, the Black Book as written in Weaving Fate, you give instructions to feed the book and the charm. The road opening, the ritual is kind of a huge part of that. And then also, lighting a candle once a week, or doing some of those other almost, I don't want to say worshipful, but like, it's like you have a date with your Black Book, right?
Yeah, totally.
Where you kind of feed it. And maybe it's just the kind of thing where like it's in these old grimoires, perhaps that was such an of course, like we don't need to write this part down.
Right.
Or, certain people just didn't feel the need to do that. And I guess I'm just saying that I really appreciate that. It tends to work better with my like heathen, like dirt heathen worldview.
I think that's one of the things that's kind of I was trying to think of I had something in my head that I just lost, but that just happens. Yeah, I mean, I think that was the big shift that I had, and that happened for me when I'd been really kind of heading further and further in the direction towards what I do now, magically, and that's what happened when I found Jan Fries. Visual magic was like, oh, this guy's actually talking about the world in a way that completely makes sense to me.
Jan Fries was also a magical route for me.
Yeah, I mean, he was the dude that like tripped me. Like I could make chaos magic stuff work as it was, kind of generally perceived in the 80s, early 90s. I could do a lot of stuff that worked. I could do different kind of witchy stuff that worked. But I didn't have, I would say that I hadn't given myself complete permission to really go with what I kind of knew, but I was still not, I just wasn't solid in it. And as soon as I started reading that book, I was like, okay, done with anything that does not make sense. And I'm going whole hog. And he was, I think, the thing that threw me straight into this kind of, though I didn't have the word for it at that time, kind of animist viewpoint. Because I'm like, no, I always talk to these things. But I don't necessarily tell people that I do. I would talk to my sigils. I would talk to my candles. I would talk to, the animals like Dr. Dolittle. And I think it was that point that really everything started to work in a much more organic way, and things stopped being nearly as weird. Like there was no longer, it like removed all of this. It kind of, I think it was like, it's like, it's the difference between having some of a language and being able to communicate with the people that speak that language, but they kind of, smile and nod at you a little bit like, I think he wants to know where he can go to the bathroom and I can help him out.
Yes.
To, okay, we got you, brother.
Right.
We totally know what you're saying, what your criteria are, and what you're trying to do. And that was also the place where I started getting feedback. That's where I started really having a sense that not just are things around me, but things are actually willing to communicate to me to some degree. And I'm not the clearest channel ever on that, but that was the stuff that opened the door for me to be able to kind of get information going, okay, I have this idea for a book, and to know that I'm being kind of guided in particular directions from the allies. And I know that there's a lot of my experience within the stuff, but a lot of the kind of pressure to put the books in particular frameworks or to talk about certain things comes from them. And they'll let me know when I'm too far off track, And so, so I was thinking, have you read Standing and Not Falling by Lee Morgan?
Oh, that has been recommended to me, but I have not yet read it.
It's kind of interesting because I was thinking, because if we're thinking about these kind of magical books, we're thinking about spell books, we're thinking about how-to books, we're thinking about the grimoires and the black books, and then we're thinking about the black book as the Weaving Fate black book. Lee has this great thing in the beginning of that book, which I really recommend. It's a very different book on magic than most, but where he says, like, there's a thing that happens for magicians where you kind of know that it works, but your belief is not really solid yet. Like, it's a little iffy. And so their suggestion is that you begin to record everything you can possibly think of that has kind of shown you that it works. So every spell you did, every ritual you did, the fact that you got that vibe while you were doing that one ritual 10 years ago, you write it all into one book. That is really this attempt to kind of like override that skeptic that is running counter to your actual experience. This is not to convince yourself that it's a work. It's to get yourself to stop trying to convince yourself that it doesn't, if that makes sense.
Yes. So this is actually something, and I'm going to ask you about this as well, but I keep black books, in your style for a specific kind of working where you're doing the journaling, but I also keep a personal black book where I just write down everything. Every working that I do, I work through it there. And I've been really experimenting with it over the last, really since 2020, maybe even 2019. Consecrating the black book. And then I have an index where I write down, I numbered all the pages. I have an index where I write down, this is what I did on these pages. And I always leave at least half a page after recording, the spell, the steps, everything that I did, to come back and report results. So that might be, say I did a spell for love, and at the coffee shop 2 months later, like I felt a really strong connection with someone, then I would want to write that in there, just so that you can kind of capture all of that, but then also find it later. Because let me tell you, I've been practicing magic long enough to have many personal grimoires, and flipping through them for something I did 10, 15 years ago is a nightmare. Like, it just doesn't, it's really hard to find stuff. And it's also something that I recommend students do as well. Don't just, as much as you think that the experience was transcendent and that you will remember it forever, if there are very specific things that you want to remember, please write them down, because that's a way of getting our brain to make it real.
And that's one of the things that I would say is interesting is I don't keep journals,
I was
but I
going to
make
ask you.
journals, but I burn them
Okay.
because mostly because I've moved so much. There was a point where I had this whole stack. I had, a foot and a half of shelf space. And I was going to move across the country in a backpack and a suitcase. And it's like, can't do that with that. So I'm in a house with a fireplace. So let's take a look at it and let it go. But I'm a big one of just writing it all down, even if you don't intend to keep it. Because for me, and for most people, I know the process of physically writing it down absolutely locks it into your memory much better. But yeah, I am not much of a magical journaler anymore. To me, it's very much most things have moved into the realm of being daily practice or not. It's rare that I do anything large. I'm much more personally focused on some of the stuff that's in Weaving Fate and a lot of the stuff that's in Changeling is close, is I would say subject matter closer, which is really trying to, like everybody else, I have a lot of stuff from my past, from my childhood, from all that stuff. And using magic to work through that stuff. My intention is to, exit this place in much better shape than I am today, or I'm already in much better shape than I was 20 years ago. But, kind of that whole process to me is the main thing that I use the stuff for. And so there's not as much that I could say that I did worked in any specific way. It's more that are the practices that I keep returning to moving me in the proper direction overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that there's definitely a point where you have daily practice where you don't necessarily need to write it down.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this becomes a part of what you do. For me, that is lighting a candle most days, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
don't need to record that anywhere. It just is a part of me tapping into that magic. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think one of the things that I was trying to think about how to. There's stuff that the black book itself, and this is again we have to keep, because I brought up the Swedish black books. We have to keep separating this out. The black book from Weaving Fate,
Yeah.
is really this interesting. It's a really interesting creature, I think, and I would love to hear your thoughts on some of this stuff, because to me, it's one of those magical practices that does something specific, at least for me and for a bunch of people that I've known, that is other than what we started it for. That it does this thing of it shows me so much of where maybe my thinking is off, where my perceptions are off. It really makes me kind of look at the things that I think I want as a really kind of organic process. It's like that there's not really anything that I've done to like make that the focus of it. It's just become very much a part of the process. Like when I write, it's like there's this really interesting thing that I can kind of go really deep into an entry. And instead of necessarily having that exact thing manifest, something will happen in the days or weeks afterwards that shows me what that thing I wanted so much was about. Have you had anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's almost like a give and take.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and I haven't been working with your style of working with the black book
Mm-hmm.
for long enough to have super long-term results.
Mm-hmm.
But I do notice that in writing things down, it does help me clarify, oh, I thought I wanted that for this reason, but I actually want it for another reason.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think also the spirit that you're communicating with, like the actual book's spirit, kind
Mm-hmm.
of recognizes that faster than you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, have this other thing that is what you actually wanted.
I've had this experience a lot, and that is, I think, the thing that really convinced me of the existence of the allies,
Right.
as something beyond just my mind liking that story.
Yeah.
Was it's one of the things that I think is really interesting because is that I've had a few people who have brought it up to me before I really got it. And they said one of the best things if you want to kind of know yourself is to do practical magic, is to do results magic about your daily life, because it is incredibly revelatory and exposing. You go, oh no, that is exactly what I asked for. It is so not what I want. Um,
Yes,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah, I think that there's that aspect of it. And then there's also um, mm, I think the best word I have to describe the relationship between like a black book spirit and myself is they're a conspirator.
Mm-hmm.
Like they are working with you um, to get something to happen, and it feels very secretive. I know that I think a lot of magic, at least in talking to a lot of people about it, a lot of times people are kind of ashamed of what they want.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to do this magic about it, and I don't want to tell other people what I did.
Yeah.
And so in that way, the black book then becomes this really intense confidant
Right.
of like, these are deep things that I desire. And I'm sharing that with this black book. Um, and yeah, it can be a very slow process. It can be a very strange process.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working with professional vulva, Kari Turing. She's my mentor in the vulva stuff tradition. And we were just having a conversation the other day about how when you start in this tradition, you're expecting big things,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're expecting huge changes because I feel like a lot of, just literature, like not magical, like nonfiction, not like occult nonfiction, but just like literature
Mm-hmm.
sort of makes magic feel this way. And then there's this sense of, I need to have a very complicated ritual, or, it's not good enough, or I'm not paying enough respect, or I'm not enough of a serious practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Vulva Stav, it's really just like I am working within my own body, within my space. And so much of the actual work of the tradition is done in the unconscious realm. It's
Mm-hmm.
dreamscapes, it's these very subtle kind of threads that come together.
Mm-hmm.
And, after 2 years of working with her, I feel like a totally different person,
Mm-hmm.
like a better person. I like who I am now. But a totally different person. And I can't name one moment where that shifted, where that
Right.
happened.
Yeah, that's a big thing, I think.
Yeah. And that's what working with a black book feels like to me. So I'm even hesitant to say, like, okay, this is, how it works. And this is how I've noticed it working. It's more like, okay, something is operating.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's even like written, it's like in the blank spaces between letters sometimes, I swear. Like
Right.
it's not obvious what the results will be until suddenly it's
Right.
very obvious.
Right. And it's funny. I get a lot. I've had a lot of communication with people who are very, I would say, super organized, and they want to bring that into that work. And I personally am not, so I don't have much I can tell them about that, except that it seems to be something that almost has to be let go to really get what you want, what you might want out of it. because it's not just, it's not, it can read like it's a great way to kind of step by step yourself into some different version of your reality. And then there's a way that that's true, but it's more like feeling into what's possible, and then letting that knowledge change your life,
Yeah.
is how I would say it. And so it's, and so for people listening, I mean, I would say that the biggest thing is to realize, and this is something that's talked about really heavily in the book and then heavily in Changeling too, but a big part of my thinking on all this stuff is that there's a part of us that is really what is us. And different traditions have different names for it. I don't really have one that I use, and that's the thing that is like, maybe we could say it's kind of like the watcher that is watching our life, and it's watching us think, and it's watching us have emotional responses, right? But we aren't those things. We're something that's a level behind that. And that part of us that does have this emotional stuff and does have this thinking stuff, also has a lot of tendency towards confusion and for story building, because that's the story building part of our consciousness. It doesn't tend to work great for most people.
Right.
If the goal is to have a really good life, because we pick stuff up that's cultural, we pick it up that's personal, we pick stuff up from the media that we follow, we pick it up from our families more than anywhere else, churches, religions, and so part of the Black Book is to really begin to take control of that narrative and change it to, if you were even in the day, this is one of the things I tell people about, is that, you could begin writing about what a really good day would be like. Not an amazing day, not the best day you've ever had, but just like, what if most of your days are not super great? What are the little things that might happen that would make them much better? Maybe you do go to the cafe and maybe it has nothing to do with a romance or a new best friend, but somebody interacts with you in a way that's not usual, and that makes you feel much better about your day. That's a really good thing to work for, because that changes the entirety of a day. And by that process of going, these things could happen, and here's a story about them, here's some stories about them, there's a way that it seems to open up our consciousness to the fact that these things can happen, that they do happen, and we simply don't notice them. And so it begins to change our internal narrative, which then, of course, begins to change how we walk in the world, which then begins to change the actual experiences that we have, and then begins to perhaps at some point really get us to question how invested we are with narrative about ourselves. It's an interesting chain there, but that's something that I see a lot of.
Yeah. I think one thing to share for people who are perfectionists, because I'm on the path of recovery from perfectionism, but I am not there. I think that the fewer rules you can place on yourself, the more challenging something can feel. And that's a space for growth, right? So if you start a Black Book from a place of, I need to write it in this every single day, this is going to be, like my morning pages practice, every single day is going to be, I'm going to light a candle and I'm going to make this specific cup of tea and I'm going to, like call on the spirit and everything. You're going to get writer's block. Because you're making it this incredibly structured thing where part of the magic is in allowing it to rest. Part of it is in how long it's going to take to get past your conscious thinking mind and into that space where it is how you're showing up in the world, where it is like how you're walking in the world, and then that in turn changing things around you. So I guess this is something that I have been challenging myself with, because again, like attempting to recover from perfectionism, that is deeply ingrained. Um, Doing things like not having a daily routine.
Yeah.
Just not, okay, every day can look different and
Mm-hmm.
I'm meeting the needs of my body in this day.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is also particularly informed by the fact that I deal with chronic illness too.
Mm-hmm.
So like anytime you have a chronic illness or are dealing with depression or something, you're going to be kind of constantly coming up against that, like the limitations in the moment, versus the perfect ritual that you had constructed for
Yes.
yourself, and that you thought that you would be able to show up to every day because you were a machine.
Oh yeah,
Right?
totally.
We're not machines here. We're demechanizing.
Yeah.
So I think that that's really important. And then there was another thing I wanted to talk about with journaling specifically. So I did mention how I have a process, for my specific, personal grimoire, which is keeping track of, exactly the steps that I took and, the results that I achieve. But the black book is different. It's in a completely different notebook.
Yeah.
The black book is much more flexible and much stranger.
I find it that for sure. One of the things that has become really interesting to me is, even though I put them in the book so people could know that if you wrote something that really didn't suit you, you could get rid of it. I don't do that. I leave it all in there. And so I go down these really weird digressions in those books where I go like, oh, this is this whole other vision of my life. And this is what I do. This is where I live. This is who I know. This is how I spend my days. And I might have 50 entries that are
Right.
tied into that thing. And then that just kind of falls away, because what happens is that, again, that revelatory piece where what actually comes from that is I begin to see it's like that allied spirit begins to go, oh, okay, like this. And you go, yeah, that's really good. And if you do go back, I often go, that day that I had feels like these 10 entries that I wrote. Like it's
Yeah.
this feeling tone is really intense. You go, that is what I was getting at, and that, however we want to view it, the field or the allies or the deep mind understood. And you go, oh, I totally changed my world in that way, even though the specific material pieces may not be the same. And that's why I kind of push so hard to kind of go with the feeling here and don't worry too much about it, about how dead on you get it. Because again, it's really easy to kind of cramp up, to use freeze terms, right? Is you really want to avoid that cramp thing. And so do whatever it takes to be easy with all of this stuff. Which doesn't mean don't be diligent, but again, you're not a machine.
Right.
The mind is very fluid. Things take time. Somebody wrote me a really great thing a few months ago and said, thank you for reading in a number of your books that this might be a 6-month process or a year process. Because that's not how we're kind of culturally set up. That's not how the YouTube, Instagram version goes. It's like, oh, I did this thing and everything's awesome now. Versus I did this thing consistently for a year and things are a lot better now.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting because I feel like on the one hand, like the Black Book practice is really close to what some other people may call manifesting, like manifesting magic.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it feels a lot more subtle. Like I know that a lot of people, or at least a lot of capital D discourse that I've seen on manifesting, particularly from more of a new age perspective, is that manifesting is trying to get a specific thing. You know, you need $5,000. You need like $10,000. You need a vacation home in Morocco. You need like all of these
Mm-hmm.
very specific and kind of grandiose things that you can prove, yes, this thing that I was doing worked.
Right.
And I do think that the Black Book, for lack of a better word, is a very good way of manifesting. Like it will manifest changes in your life.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a ton of control over what those changes are, and they're probably going to be for the better.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of is in this sort of conversation. It's very much not that new age capitalist sort of, I'm going to get X thing kind of way of forcing the magic to bend into your will.
Right. And I think it's, yeah, I mean, that's, I think what I really love about the process is that it is this, it's the two things. One is it's really revelatory about my own kind of blind spots. And it opens up a kind of communication that I didn't have before I began doing this kind of work with parts of myself and then with the allies. But that, yeah, that it really did move me into this thing of like, I think that if somebody really did just, I made a suggestion there, if you really thought about like what good days would look like, if you created a kind of Black Book practice, that really that's all you were doing. Nothing crazy, nothing, yeah, I didn't get on the jet to Morocco necessarily or anything like that. I think you would see really incredible results because it just opens. There's all of this stuff I would say that the field is highly responsive to us, and we live in a particular moment where there's been a ton of work done over a very long period of time to kind of deny that reality, and so it's work to undo that. If you're not, there are people who are naturally wired that they just go, yeah, I don't believe all that crap, and they do great. But for most folks, there's some stuff in between. And I think it's a really great process to begin just chipping that stuff away, because it is really interesting, because it's like I can go into these modes where everything is pure doom, you know, and you can, you know, you can objectively look out and go, yeah, the world is a really harsh place. And a lot of people that have very different ideas of what is acceptable to do as a person have a lot of power. This is true. But there's also another thing that is true, and it's easy to lose sight of. And I think that currently we're in a moment where there's an intentional process running to get people to lose sight of that, because there's so much power in going, it could be different. And that's the other thing that the Black Book is great for, is it begins to go like, oh yeah, so maybe I'm really neurotic and have been kind of an asshole. But if I could actually imagine, not just saying, I'm not going to be an asshole and I'm not going to be as neurotic, but if I actually go through this kind of ritualized process of really imagining myself and seeing myself and recording it, saying, I had this day where I was not an asshole and I was a little less neurotic, where I had the option. Somebody got up in my face, somebody cut me off somewhere where I would normally freak out. You know, if you're tended towards like freaking out in your car and yelling at other people, I would use that as something to write in the Black Book about. Is I got cut off by this guy who was a complete maniac, and I was chill, and I just listened to the radio, continued having my coffee or talking to my girlfriend or whatever, right? It opens the space for those things to be your actual experience, and so but it's, and that's the thing that I think you were saying, is it's both that and it's this other thing, which is, I think, the crazy thing about magic versus some of this, like, I think Chowan is the one that always brings up vision boarding as her particular thing, but in a mocking sense. But it's not this, yeah, this is me in my fancy dress getting on the private jet to go to this fancy place. it's not just that. It doesn't mean you couldn't do it if that was something that you truly wanted. But for most of us, that's not what we truly want. We want something that feels like that. And that's the image that we produce in our mind of what that would be. If I had that kind of money, if I had that kind of life, if my life looked like that, everything would be different. I think that for most people, that is really saying, this is the best I can picture of what a good life would look like. And I think that the Black Book process is a really good one to figure out what that might really look like for you.
Yeah. And I think too, there's a way of working with it that is very gentle. And I think also I think the effectiveness of it comes really from how do I want to feel rather than what are the things that I want to have or what are the things I want to do. It's like, how do I want to feel both in my daily life during days that are not extraordinary and also during days that are extraordinary.
Right. No, I love that. I think that's really right on.
So I'm really curious. This has come up in my Patreon community a couple of times, and I'm just so curious to hear from the source. We had actually over the winter, we organized a like climate change mediation sort of Black Book circle. So we all got together over Zoom and we, did some raising of energy and we went through the process together and created Black Books where we were specifically making entries about, how we want the world to be as we're slowing down climate change. What are your views on using the Black Book as a tool for something outside of just like a singular person?
I mean, I am super into it. And it's, again, I don't know. I know I've talked about it a couple of times that every book that I have has subtext. That there's something that's not written that I think is implicit in the book, but I thought if I kind of made it implicit, it would actually have less impact because the people that you make that needed it to be implicit or stated implicitly wouldn't necessarily get it anyway. And it's better if somebody kind of comes to that conclusion on their own. I think that that is one of the hugest uses of this, in that I think that part of why we're where we are is because there's been a really consistent narrative about what is possible. And I think that it's really wrong. I think that if there are assumptions that have been bred into the way that we run the world that are not real, that I think that there's a chunk of people who are absolutely driven to have as much as they can get. But I don't believe that that's the norm. I think that if there had been a sustained kind of open education for the last 40 years about what's going on and what it really means, that we didn't get derailed into all sorts of kind of special interest discussions on something like climate change, but on lots of other things, that people would have come to much different conclusions about what was possible and how you might do it. I don't think that humans are unwilling to sacrifice immediate comfort for long-term sustainability. And so I think that things like the Black Book can allow us to see that world as it is, which is how I've used it in things like that, is going not what is the solution necessarily, but what is a further step? What would it look like if we were 50% closer to that worldview that would allow that change to occur? And then what might it be like living if I was alive 250 years from now and we were in a completely different scenario? What would that life look like? Now this might lead to someone going, oh, and here's a way that we could get here that people would actually get on board with. But I don't know that that's the important piece. It's the important piece to me is being able to see past these kind of monolithic blockages that are theoretically impassable, that you theoretically can't workaround, that theoretically no one would accept that. And so if we can actually, and this is true for working it personally as well, but a big part of this is if you can begin to really have a sense of experiencing that world, I think it opens up the door for that to be a much greater potential.
Yeah, I definitely, after this conversation, I definitely feel that even more strongly. Um, I think that one of the things that always um, really bothers me, particularly about climate change, is how catastrophic people who believe, um, scratch that, going back, people who understand that climate change is happening
Mm-hmm.
can have a tendency to read the data and get really catastrophic about it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend actually who, I have several friends actually who never share anything about climate change unless there is also some kind of solution,
Mm-hmm.
or some kind of way of thinking about how the world is going to change, and how we can continue to survive and live.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she's even said before, like, anyone who only shares catastrophic data and really like the world will end by 2049 is the Fed. Um, like, like they are a plant. They are trying to get you not to come up with solutions on your own. They are trying to. They are so establishmentarian that they have to believe that this isn't possible, or that overcoming this massive issue is not possible. And so, I mean, even if the Black Book, magically, I have never, worked something on the scale of global climate change. It feels very much beyond me personally. Um, I mean, not that I've not done like spells for slowing down climate change and stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying. It's more that, like, how do you see and track results on such a global scale? Is something that's hard for me to wrap my brain around. And at the same time, the Black Book is actually kind of a perfect way of working with that, because it's getting you to think creatively about what is actually needed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, oh, through my magic, I'm going to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere. Like,
Right, totally.
that's not how it's operating. What is operating is, okay, how am I going to continue to feed my family?
Right. Or
Okay.
even, yeah, you find some crazy stuff occasionally that you go like, like I remember I was in a particularly doomy moment one day when I saw this article about that they've discovered that there's, I can't remember now if it's a yeast or a fungus or whatever, but that they found in the ocean that eats some kinds of plastic.
Right.
And you go, well, that's very interesting, because that suggests that there's possibilities I never thought of that could change the
Right.
nature of some things, right? And so I think it is. I mean, I think the root idea of any kind of magic, or whether even if we're talking about kind of New Age manifestation stuff and all that, is that it's very clear, however you want to define it. Even if you just want to define it based on, we'll give you more information first because it'll make it easier to form the next sentence, but that thoughts are causative. For humans, thoughts are causative. They change what we do. They change what we think is possible to do. This may only be in the sense that then you actually go and pick up the shovel and you go and clean up something with the shovel. But I think that magic deals with the idea that we can communicate with the world that we're in. And it's really the tool that we use to kind of generate that. And so I think it's very important to see, or to to kind of train ourselves to have the ability to see to the other side of whatever our problems are, whether that's health or something else. It doesn't mean that you ignore it. It doesn't mean that you deny that you're not well or there's issues with the environment or any of that. That's not what I'm talking about whatsoever, but that you hold that idea that this could be different. I could feel different someday, in a better way. We could, super volcano would change the climate. Maybe it's not the most pleasant way, but
Right.
but so you can go, okay, these things are they happen. Things happen, and I believe that for us, that's one of that's the human thing, is that we're the species that has the ability to know that our thoughts can be causative. I don't think we're really special in any other way, and that. Yeah, especially now we're in this really weird time. None of us, well, some of us did. I forget that there are younger people. I'm sorry. Most of us did not grow up in a world where there is so much control of data, that the
Yes.
belief that the internet was going to be making everything free has been proven to not be correct so far. It has meant that there is a vast, vast, vast amount of data control and information control. And that stuff changes how we think, whether we want it to or not, and whether we're aware of it or not. And so you really do have to, I think, come up with some kind of a practice if you're interested about these kinds of things to see beyond all of that stuff. And to me, one of the best ways to do that is to really kind of, can you actually imagine things being better? And that could be your marriage, that could be your relationship with your kids. Instead of just saying, I want this to be better, or I'm committed to this being better, and I'm going to try not to get angry. So the most common thing I do is, can you, in your black book, really get fully into the experience of the things that set you off in your family? Don't. Or the places where you don't show up, you do. Because the mind doesn't really know that what you wrote hasn't happened. That writing process solidifies something. So you've added an option to the book that may not have existed before. And the more that we can kind of do that on all levels, I think we end up in a very different world.
Yeah. So I'm going to wind us down. Mm-hmm. This has been an incredible conversation. I love being able to have just like really deep conversations with people. Mm-hmm. And so it's been an absolute pleasure to go and really drill down on this practice, what it means, how it operates, those kinds of things. Is there anything that you have not already talked about that you would like to?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that that's a good chunk. And just, yeah, I'm super, super thankful that you had me on, and it's an honor, and I totally appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's truly an honor for me as well to just be able to speak with you. So if you're interested in checking out Aidan's books, I am going to be linking them in the show notes. All the goodies of where to find him, his work, his books, etc. will all be there. Thank you so much, Aidan.
Thank you, Siri.
Did you know that I wrote a book with Cassandra Snow? It's true. Lessons from the Empress is coming out October 1st, 2022 from Wiser Books. Lessons from the Empress is a tarot workbook for creativity and self-care. Self-expression and self-exploration are essential for living a fulfilling life, and the tarot allows for an incredible opportunity for creative exploration. Using the Empress, a symbol of creation and abundance, as a metaphor for the journey, Lessons from the Empress takes readers on a journey through the tarot using easy-to-follow magical rituals, tarot spreads, and creativity exercises in a way that will empower you to embrace your true self and express that self to the world. You can pre-order the book anywhere books are sold, and just to make things easy, I've included a link to IndieBound in the show notes. Happy reading! Thank you so much for listening to the Heathen's Journey podcast. I'm so honored to share these practices, conversations, and thoughts with you. If you would like to support this podcast, please consider supporting it on Patreon. The Patreon is designed as a learning and sharing space for fellow inclusive heathens to grow their practices. Every month, we have a book club meeting. I share research notes and episodes without the ads. If you would like to join, you can do so at patreon.com/heathensjourneypod. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, keep it weird.